Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Merritt, and I am here today to talk about what constitutes a good drug trial versus an anecdotal drug trial. And this is particularly important in today's environment as we have a lot of discussion about trying out malaria drugs and some older HIV drugs in patients. And there's a lot of news about the success of these drugs. The problem is we don't know whether these drugs have been successful in treating this particular virus or not. And the reason for that is we don't have adequate control trials to determine whether or not people were getting better on their own or whether or not the drug actually helped them get better. So in the few instances we've seen so far, people have been given a drug and they've gotten better. The problem is we don't know if they might have gotten better if they didn't receive the drug. So what we really need is one group of people who receive these drugs and another group of people who don't. And we see whether or not people get better in the drug group more, or if the same number of people get better in the drug group versus the group that does not get a drug. And the reason that's important is we need to know whether or not we are helping people, potentially hurting people, or doing nothing and wasting time and resources trying out drugs for which there is little to no evidence of their efficacy. So the first thing we need is that adequate control sample to determine whether or not a group receiving a drug is getting better at a different rate than a group that's not receiving a drug. Ideally, we would want to do this in a double-blind, placebo-controlled, random assigned trial. And there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with random assignment. Random assignment is critical in these kinds of clinical experiments. The reason for that is we want to make sure that there's no bias in assigning people to either receive a drug or not receive a drug. So it's possible that doctors may have a bias towards giving younger, healthier patients these drugs because they think they're more likely to benefit from them because they're younger and healthier. So now it might look like the drug is effective because we have a younger, healthier sample. Conversely, we might be giving this drug to the oldest, sickest patients who don't get any better, and we might think the drug is not effective because we have selected a group of people who are already sick and already very ill. So we want to make sure we use that kind of random assignment so there isn't any bias in terms of who's receiving the drug and who's not. The double-blind placebo-controlled part of this is also particularly important. Placebo-controlled, we know people think will get better because they think they've been given a drug that will help them get better. It's a well-known, well-established effect. But we also want to make sure that in the event of a drug trial, that these patients are being evaluated without concern to whether or not they've received this particular drug. So it's possible that a physician might unknowingly rate patients who've received a drug as having less symptoms, having a better lung functioning, etc. So we want to make sure that we do this kind of double-blind procedure in which the physician nor the patient know whether or not they've received a drug so that we're getting unbiased information. So all of this is to demonstrate that we really need to be thinking scientifically about how to approach this crisis, and in particular, how we go about determining whether or not our resources should go towards a particular drug or not by finding evidence, sufficient evidence in favor of that drug. Of course, we all hope the drugs will work well. I join the President of the United States in hoping that they work well, but hoping is not enough for us to determine whether or not the drug actually works well. And we need that evidence in order for us to determine whether or not we should be putting resources towards providing drugs that may have questionable efficacy in this particular crisis. So I thought I would take this opportunity to bring this information to you also to help you understand how experiments help provide causal information versus anecdotal evidence in which we can't determine whether or not a drug has been effective because we have not used adequate control trials. And so we genuinely need that experiment in which we have a group that doesn't receive the drug and a group that does receive the drug so we can determine whether or not the people getting the drug are actually getting better or if there is no difference at all. And it's only through that kind of experimental trial that we can do that. All right, thanks, and I hope everyone's staying safe out there. Remember, wash your hands, and stay home.